At the bottom of 21, where we left off last lesson, we're looking at this change within the novels. We're looking at her building of that understanding that a female character needs to have be multifaceted, needs to have real depth to it, and faults to their character because that's what people have. Okay, and that's a real crux of her argument. At the bottom of 21, she says. So the last point that we made was talking about the first paragraph of 21, where she said that oversimplifications may be necessary for some phases of political movements, but she's suggesting that the feminist movement has moved beyond that. Okay, it's not necessary for it, and in actual fact, it's a detriment. So the second paragraph of the page on 21, she starts with, if a novelist writing at the time was also a feminist, she felt her choices restricted. Were all heroines to be essentially spotless of soul, struggling against, fleeing from, or done in by male oppression? Was the only plot to be the perils of Pauline, with a lot of mustache-twirling villains, but minus the rescuing hero? And so she talks about that tying in of the plot choices as a reflection of the ideology of the feminist movement at the time. And so that is a criticism of the limitations of that view of society and that limitations of that aspect of the movement. And so when she moves through, she again employs that convention of the technique of the rhetorical questions, and this following it in that kind of Socratic method where she's posing questions that she's going to respond to. So halfway through that stanza, she says, she says, did we face a situation in which women could do no wrong, but could only have wrong done to them? Were women more confined yet again to the alabaster pedestal so beloved of the Victorian age? So the alabaster pedestal then is a metaphorical technique. So she's talking about it's going backwards. To view women in that way is actually moving backwards through time through the representation of women. Women are not spotless. Women are not without sin. And again, that is a real driving force within it. And in that sense, and we'll talk about this more when we complete, but that kind of an understanding of identity and the construction of identity as well. Just so for future prosperity, Rochelle asked if I was recording this, and I am recording it. Okay, so and so she continues that, and she says in the next one, she's talking like there is some element to that. A female character could rebel against social structures without then having to throw herself in front of a train. She could think the unthinkable and say the unsayable. She could flout authority. So could do new bad good things, such as leaving her husband and even deserting her children. Such activities and emotions, however, were according to the new moral thermometer of the times, not really bad at all. They were good, and the women who did that were praiseworthy. I'm not against such plots. I just don't think they're the only ones. So again, so she's talking about that there was, because of the way in which the feminist movement, her perception of the feminist movement at the time, was that you started to create these just dual roles of women. And so ultimately they were without sin, and if they were doing anything wrong, it was as a response to the patriarchal society that was constructed around them. So that is a real criticism that she has there. And so again, she talks about that in the bottom paragraph of 21, where she says, and there were certain new no-nos. For instance, was it all permissible anymore to talk about women's will to power because weren't women supposed to be by nature communal egalitarians? So that means like equal for all, looking after everyone. Could one depict the scurvy behavior often practiced by women against one another or by little girls against other little girls? Could one examine? So again, that listing of these different questions that existed all serve to in a culmination of a criticism of this ideology. Now, obviously, when we're reading it, and you wouldn't say this in the exam, but you kind of all right, I get the point. But that is the purpose of this is she's appealing to her audience. It is an educated audience. She's presenting a very educated response. She's showing an understanding of the thinking of the time, and she's responding to it and criticizing it through textual evidence. And so that's important in terms of that structural form. So in the question that you got in the trials, it did talk, it was asking you to show that understanding of how structure and form influence, and so it's important that you make that clear that you have an understanding of that within this. So we're moving down to be quiet, Sean. We're moving down to page 22. And she starts with a colloquial term there, and this again is it's important to show that she moves in and out of really highbrow language and really dense literature and analysis of literature to use humor. Now, on the page, I would suspect it's not as funny as her being presented. Okay, and again, remember if you were understanding. And I'm not saying that you don't understand, but if you are really okay with the different textual references, it'd be easier to follow the flow. Okay, but so if she goes through and says, or in other words, we're meant to get all the juicy parts. Literature cannot do without bad behavior, but was all the bad behavior to be reserved for men? Was it to be all Iago, and I'm not even going to say his name, and with Jezebel and Amida and Medusa and Delilah and Regan and Goneril and spotty-handed Lady Macbeth, powerful super femme fatale in She and Toni Morrison Sula to be banished from view? I hope not. Women characters arise. Take back the night. Take back the night is an allusion to a phraseology used within the feminist movement. So there was that like a counter protest to sexual violence against women and women's right to be out at night and to dress how they want and all those things. And so she's saying that in this case, by removing those characters, the actual oppressors of women are the feminists, or the extreme feminists that she's rallying against throughout. And she again brings it back to her own personal experience within I've always known that there were spell-running evil parts for women. And she goes through even within the grim fairy tales. And so she brings the fact that these have existed all the way through. These were real characters that have existed, rich characters, and the end point on this third paragraph on page 22, where she says, singly, the female characters are limited and two-dimensional, but put all together, they form a rich five-dimensional picture. So within these stories, sometimes the women's role was limited. However, the fact that they were part of a greater moral story and they had roles that were negative as well, it produced a richer story as a whole. And as we go down to the bottom paragraph on 22, while pondering these matters, I thought back over the numerous bad female literary characters I've known and tried to sort them into characters. If you're doing this on a blackboard, you might set up kind of grid. Bad women who do bad things for bad reasons, good women who do good things for good reasons, good women who do bad things for good reasons, bad women who do bad things for good reasons, and so forth. But a grid would be just a beginning, because there are so many factors involved. For instance, when the character thinks it is bad, what the reader thinks is bad, and what the author thinks is bad may all be different. But let me define a thoroughly evil person as one who intends to do evil and for purely selfish reasons. The Queen in Snow White would fit that. Now, the purpose of that is to show that, again, to bring the fact that these characters, these richer characters, have existed within literature throughout time. She brings it back to a simplistic story, and ties in this very, again, intellectual debate to a very common tale, and saying that there have been these evil characters, and if you take them away from that story, then you're taking away the roles for women within literature. So if you're saying that women are incapable of these actions, then again you're removing it. She makes, and then I guess as a counter to that, or a building on that, she's saying it's just as prevalent within Shakespeare. So she makes reference with, again, you use examples of multiple examples of intertextuality that permeate throughout, where she talks about Regan and Goneril, who are the sisters within King Lear. And very little can be said in their defense except that they seem to have been against the patriarchy. Then you have the Lady Macbeth, which, as we pointed out yesterday, can provide some form of, you could make an allusion to it being a motif rather, throughout, because it starts with the spotty-handed and she keeps on coming back to her as a character. Lady Macbeth, however, did her wicked murder for a conventionally acceptable reason, one that would win approval for her in corporate business circles. She was furthering her husband's career. She pays the corporate wife too. She subdues her own nature and has a nervous breakdown as a result. And so she's the purpose of then, as she goes through and names these different characters, is that there's not just that there are evil characters within, or evil female characters within literature, as in her argument, as there should be. There's also various levels of evil that exist within these female characters, which again serves to highlight the fact that there's a richness to it, and to remove that is to remove the richness that exists. If you're looking at, sorry, everyone else understands Chanel, so I'll go through it for Chanel. No, so it's saying that there's there's different levels of evil within the characters. Okay, so there's different levels of evil that exist, and she goes through that. And in doing so, her point that we can ascertain is that she is saying that, just trying to re-emphasize just how rich the literary history is for women, and to remove that is to sacrifice too much. To remove that the concept of women being capable of evil is to remove a great depth from literature. Okay, and so she's saying, yeah. So she's saying it's not even as simplistic as saying there's bad characters. It's saying there's different levels of evil and different reasons as there are in life, and that's what should be replicable in literature.
So again,
different levels of evil, just and reasons for the evil, just as there are in life, and there should be a reflection between the two. There are figures like, so this is the halfway through the second last paragraph on 23. Then there are figures like Hawthorne's adulteress Hester Prynne, she of the Scarlet Letter, who becomes a kind of sex saint through suffering. We assume she did what she did through love, and thus she becomes a good woman who did a bad thing for a good reason. And Madame Bovary, who had not only indulged her romantic temperament and voluptuous sensual appetites, but spent too much of her husband's money doing it, which was her downfall. A good course in double-entry bookkeeping would have saved the day. I suppose she is a foolish woman who did a stupid thing for an insufficient reason, since the men in question were dolts. Neither the modern reader nor the author conspire her very evil, though many contemporaries did. As you can see, if you read the transcript of the court case, in which the force of moral rectitude tried to get the book censored. So the purpose of highlighting that, again, is showing that not only do these characters exist within history, but our perception of them changes as a reflection of our context. So if you're drawing a parallel to some of the other speeches that we're looking at, you can make links to that understanding of history, an important understanding of history. And how having that understanding of history informs our understanding of the now. So that's a link that you could make. And while they're looking at completely different concepts within history, so Pearson and Keating looking at in terms of an understanding of Australian history, and Atwood looking at in terms of literature history as an understanding and a framing of her argument, it still has the importance and the value placed on that. So we're going to, the bottom paragraph on 23. One of my favourite bad women is Becky Sharp of Thackeray's Vanity Fair. She makes no pretensions to goodness. She's wicked. She enjoys being wicked, and she does it out of vanity and her own profit, tricking and deluding English society in the process, which the author implies deserves to be tricked and deluded, since it is hypocritical and selfish to the core. Becky, like Erdone, Sprank, and Edith Wharton's The Custom of the Country, is an adventuress. She lives by her wits and uses men as ambulatory bank accounts. Many literary adventurers are male. Consider Thomas Mann's Felix Kroll, Confidence Man. But it does make a difference if you change the gender. For one thing, the nature of the loot changes. For a male adventurer, the loot is money and women. but for a female one, the loot is money and men. Becky Sharp is a bad mother too, and that's a whole other subject. Bad mothers and wicked stepmothers and oppressive aunts like the ones in Jane Eyre, and nasty female teachers and depraved governesses and evil grannies, the possibilities are many. So the purpose of looking at that little part there is, again, she's using that example of personalizing it by talking one of her favorite characters, and uses it as an example of how you're limiting the fun, and for want of a better word, that a character can have, and the reasoning behind it if you change that gender and if you don't allow it to be the same. Okay, and so there's an element of humor there in terms of that repetition. So the loot is money and women, but for a female one, the loot is money and men, and it's essentially saying they're no different. Okay, so changing that gender only just serves to highlight the fact that the women are just as capable of these desires as the men. Now she transitions, and this is so the last part, which we'll just go through. She transitions into the discussion about women. She uses Becky Sharp, the character is Becky Sharp, as that device to transition. But I think that's enough reprehensible female behaviour for today. Life is short, art is long, motives are complex, and human nature is endlessly fascinating. Many doors stand ajar, others beg to be unlocked. What is in the forbidden room? Something different for everyone, but something you need to know and will never find out unless you step across the threshold. If you're a man, the bad female character in a novel may be, in Jungian terms, your anima. I don't know, might have said that wrong. How do you say it? Anima. Sorry, just seeing people paying attention. But if you're a woman, the bad female character is your shadow. And as we know from the Offenbach horror opera Tales of Hoffmann, she who loses her shadow also loses her soul. So in that point, these last two stanzas are last two paragraphs are very, very important. Okay, these last two paragraphs are very, very important because it really does summarize the argument as a whole. So when she says that first part, the part that I just read out very poorly, she is talking about the fact that the purpose of art is to explore these possibilities. The purpose of art is to explore these possibilities, and the purpose of the female character being evil is for male characters. For male readers, it may result in them contemplating and thinking about like the opposite sex, as well as their own responses to that and their own reactions to it. And for the females, it serves to show that an understanding that a reflection upon their own understanding of self. Okay. Now, for those people who are doing Extension 1, you would have done some readings around that, and I'm actually going to get you guys to share that and understand that in a second.
It's about fairy tales? Atwood?
No, the Jungian.
That was genre theory.
Yeah.
That was the first topic we ever did.
Okay, but anyway, so it's not a huge thing, but basically, you're looking at a psychologist and you're looking at an understanding of self. Okay, and so she's saying the purpose of that, and the illusion of that is that we have an understanding of ID and the understanding of self, and it's embedded in through art. And art, the purpose of art is for us to get a better understanding of ourselves. And once again, ties in the whole speech by saying that removal of that removes that aspect of art. Okay.
What does spotty-headed mean?
So in the first one, it's an allusion to the Macbeth, Lady Macbeth.
Why is she spotty-headed?
The blood's on her hands.
Oh, got it. I thought it was kind of moles.
Evil women are necessary in story traditions for two more obvious reasons. Of course, first, they exist in life, so why shouldn't they exist in literature? Second, which may be another way of saying the same thing, women have more to them than virtue. They are fully dimensional human beings. They too have subterranean depths. Why shouldn't their many dimensionality be given literary expression? And when it is, female readers do not automatically recoil in horror. In Aldous Huxley's novel Point Counterpoint, Lucy Tantamount, the man-destroying vamp, is preferred by the other female characters to the earnest, snivelling woman whose man she has reduced to a wet bath sponge. As one of them says, Lucy's obviously a force. You may not like that kind of force, but you can't help admiring the force in itself. It's like Niagara. In other words, awesome. Or as one English woman said to me recently, women are tired of being good all the time. I will leave you the final quotation. It's from Dame Rebecca West speaking in 1912. Ladies of Great Britain, we have not enough evil in us. Note where she locates the desired evil, in us. So the tying there is that she's saying, again, that if there's a movement within the feminist movement and a greater strength of femininity and understanding of female identity, it needs to be entwined with an understanding that women are more than what has been portrayed of them. And so if you're limiting to women are just the good, you're limiting the multi-dimensional aspect of women, and as such, it has a reflection on society and the way in which women view themselves. And so she ties back then to 1912, which you'd be looking at the link back to the real origins of the feminist movement, the first wave of feminism, the suffragette movement. And in saying that, so she's talking about it's a validation of, I guess, part of her argument and her feminist credentials, in the sense that she ties it back to that and saying that right from the beginning, the concept of women being evil and the concept of women having the capacity for wrong is embedded within the feminist tradition, and to move away from that is actually the wrong thing. Now, I would be surprised if many of you use this as or list this as your favorite speech, okay? But it is one that has been on the module for a while, okay? Has been on the module for a while. So as I said to you before, I have a real belief that they more likely not they're going to specify one of the speeches. Now, if I was to put money on it, one of the speeches that they would use is either Keating's or perhaps this one, only because it's been on for so long. Okay, so
how would we link these two?
And that's what we're going to be doing now. Okay, so I'm just ending the recording.